Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. So I'm here with the amazing Azeem. So let me know. It's working again. Let me know if you can hear us. And obviously, if you could see the fireworks. You say fireworks? How that is called?
Yeah.
Fireworks. Okay. So can you hear us, first of all? Okay. So Isaline saying welcome, but now I need to know, can you hear us? Yeah. Okay. So yes, we hear. Okay. So that is perfect. So, okay. Thank you so much. So people are joining gradually. So what I will do is that I will start with our introduction about the SEO nerd, and then Asim will speak. So I will start by sharing the slides. Screen. Okay. I don't know how to share apparently. Okay. So let me share slideshow. Okay, first of all, welcome to SEO Nerd Switzerland. SEO Nerd Switzerland is an association. It was created by Isalin, which is in the public today, and myself. And we built it because we wanted to have interaction with other SEOs, and we wanted to meet other people and not just be between us. And we wanted to expand our knowledge and then to share our knowledge too. And that's what happened. SEO Nerd Switzerland was built. So this is how we started. So what can I say about the community? Something that is really important. It's open to everybody. We try to provide trustworthy information. We have all the genuine discussion. So we want that people are kind and nice when they join. We try to accelerate also the networking. So we have physical events sometimes, and we try to accelerate the networking in the physical events. There is also a part where we try to work also on the promotion of the career. So we always have an event at the end of the year where we speak about career. We welcome new public speakers. So what we do is then we support the new public speaker if we like the talk, and then we support them in in the training part also. Okay. So we are a diversified SEO community, etc., etc. So you got the concept of what we do. So one thing that is important, if you want to support us, and this is really important for us, especially for the sponsor, is liking, sharing on social media, because liking and sharing on social media is caring. So please help us and support us also to create a bit of visibility and make our sponsor happy. So this is our sponsor. We have Leap, which is a web and mobile development agency, and we have Working SEO, which does podcast, and it will be back in being a job board. What else? Next event. Let me explain the next event. It will be a physical event. It will happen in Zurich. We will have Dani speaking and Gabriela. Gabriela will speak about how to improve your internal linking, and she will give some results about internal linking. And Dani will speak more about, she had a blog, how she succeed with her blog, with her traveling blog. So this is our next physical event in Zurich on March 5th. Now, let me introduce Azeem. So, well, this is the reason why you're here, obviously. It's about him, and we were speaking about how to set up and use a podcast to reach an international audience. I will stop sharing because I just have one screen, and I want to see Azeem when I'm speaking. So, okay. So, I can say tons of things about him because, like, probably there are people that know you already. Probably if you are here, they know you. They know that you won several awards. They know that you do public speaking, etc., etc. But I decided to explain my story about Azim, which is a bit embarrassing, but I will explain it. So so why I appreciate him, because once He didn't know me at all. I did the story of like a sort of link builder, when the link builder contact you on LinkedIn. I didn't contact him for links, that no. But I did a sort of sales pitch, even if it is not at all my job, but it was a special situation. And I was like, let me try. And he could have said, fuck up, Sarah. I don't know you. Who cares about you? And instead, he was very kind in answering me. And then I said, oh my God, I like his podcast. He's very kind. And then I was like, it's the perfect aspiration, Switzerland. And I was like, okay, I would like to do something with him. And here we go, we have Azeem. So, okay, that's all. I will let you introduce yourself better, maybe, than just by saying the story how I met you.
No, look, excuse me. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everybody who's joined and in the audience. Like I said, and just to echo what you said, please do like, share. I was going to say subscribe, like it's a podcast. Please do like and share, because it does mean a lot. And the first time I met Sarah was she was brilliant. We worked in a related industry, and she just reached out and said, "Look, you don't know me, blah blah blah, but can you give me some advice on this?" And of course, I'm more than happy to help. Much like the mission of SEO in Switzerland, I believe that the industry will improve the more we help lift each other up rather than tear each other down. But that is a story for another day. Yes, absolutely. I will share my slides, and if you tell me when you can see them.
So I can see them, so I guess everybody can see them.
If you can't, it's going to be really boring 30 minutes or so. But yeah, look, let's go for it. Look, I've had a fantastic introduction, but I'll give you a quicker one, and I'll put this in the start of all of my decks, because as a British person, I don't know what the right way to describe this is, but we don't talk about our own successes enough. So you've obviously joined, I'm going to be talking about podcasting, but 9 times out of 10, maybe a bit less now, people will look and say, "Oh, who's this guy?" So very quickly, on top of that fantastic introduction, I'm Azeem. I've given talks all over the UK, Europe, and USA. I've been fortunate enough, so on the top left of the screen there, you can see I gave a talk at Brighton SEO in front of a few thousand people. On the top right, that was at one of the largest PPC conferences in the UK, in front of a few thousand people. In the middle of the screen was probably one of my biggest achievements, going live for SEMrush Global Marketing Day. I think there were 80,000 people there, very nervous. And then at the bottom, like the middle of last year, excuse me, I was selected by Google to be part of their Think With Google initiative. And then, more importantly, I've got my own podcast, and it's called the Azeem Digital Asks Podcast, which is on the t-shirt that I'm wearing. But if I move my slide on, there you go. This is what it's called. That's the logo. You can find it on all the major podcast platforms and YouTube too. I cover all of those topics that you can see there and more. And I think what sets my podcast apart, which I will tell you all about, is that I try to prioritize guests who are, I consider, marginalized. So maybe that might be people from like a minority community, very heavily women focused. And for example, I've had a lot of Black guests on during the past as well, because I believe these communities, certainly in the marketing industry, are heavily underrepresented, and I wanted to find a space, excuse me, to make sure that they had a voice. I've been quite fortunate to build up a bit of a following and awareness in the industry, and I want to use that to help other people make sure they get theirs too. So why have I just told you all that? Because I believe now put myself under a lot of pressure to deliver a very good talk for you about how you can use podcasting to reach an international audience. But pressure makes diamonds. So stick with me. Hopefully you will take some things away from this talk, and you'll start your own podcast, or you'll help your own or your company's podcast ultimately become 1% better starting from tomorrow. Very quickly clear my throat. So about my podcast and why am I here to talk to you about it. It's now on YouTube. It's in the top 10 digital marketing podcasts in the UK. It's rated in the top 20 globally. It's been heard in over 100 countries, and it's got 98% retention, which basically means people listen to virtually all of the episode. But then right at the end, the boring bit where I say like, rate, share, subscribe, tell your next door neighbour's dog to listen to it, all that stuff, people ignore that. That's fine. And it's been in multiple chart places. But podcasting is very much a long game. So if you look here at this slide, this is about 2.5 years of growth. The flat line is because I couldn't get the chart to start any later than June. So I started in June. And it was very slow, but you can see over a number of years that progressively builds and compounds over time. So those of you in the audience who work in SEO, search engine optimization, you know this is very much compounding. So if you haven't started, the best time was yesterday. The second best time is like literally right now after this talk. There are a few things that I want you to take away from this talk. But if you only take away 3 things and you remember only 3 things from this talk, it's going to be these 3 that I tell you now. When it comes to podcasting, excuse me, number 1, it's easier than you think, much easier than you think. It's also cheaper than you think. And the biggest one for me is consistency over everything. Now, you might look at my podcast and think, he's not put an episode out since towards the end of last year. That's because I'm a one-man band. I do everything by myself, and I'm not going to put out several poor episodes. I'd rather give you quality episodes. So, as an aside, it's coming back very soon. If you're interested and want to be a guest, call me. We can make it happen. But let's talk about it. Let's talk a couple of things here. So let me give you some context first in terms of podcasting. So if you look at this chart here, this is the number of Americans aged 12 plus listening to podcasts. There's a very common misconception in the past, certainly when it was during COVID time, and my podcast started during COVID time, that this was a short-term fad. It was only going to be around while people were all stuck at home, isolating, and when everybody went back to work, they would stop listening to it. But as you can see, that number, excuse me, progressively rises. So as of April 2021, there was 2 million. If I asked you to guess how many there were a couple of years later, you'll see that it's like over 4.2 million, which is a huge amount. The worst time to get a dry throat, sorry. So when it comes to podcast episodes, same, couple of years ago, you've got 48 million, right? Absolutely huge. When it comes to September 23, he's got 150 million. So this is a space that is constantly growing. And when it comes to things like this, and I'll talk about consistency later on, there's a stat flying around somewhere that says many podcasts that start don't tend to get past a particular number of episodes. When you pass that particular number of episodes, you automatically put yourself within the top 5% of podcasters. So there's a number to aim for to go there. But ultimately, many people in the audience are marketers, and they want to be learning about, what they can do in terms of marketing. How is it going to help me either market myself, my brand, my business? How can I reach new people and get them interested in me or my service or offering? Well, basically 7 out of 10 people here who've been surveyed listen to podcasts to learn new things. If you're anything like me, you'll have a podcast on in the background that's completely different, for example, to the space that you're in now, to learn new things, to actively absorb new things. Also, I've talked a lot about podcasts in the audio form. When it comes to video, basically, people might think, oh, is video dead? I've heard this a lot. Video is dying, blah, blah. Well, at some point, there's basically 10 million more podcast listeners in the USA than there are Netflix account owners. So it's a huge space. Excuse me. Then it comes to people who are classed as super listeners. So with podcasts, there are a section of people who will listen, like diehard fans, they will listen to like every episode the second you put it out. There are particular podcasts that whenever it pops up on my phone, they've got a new episode. Immediately I'll download it and I'll schedule time to make sure I'm not doing any busy work, that I can absorb this in full. They are super listeners, and those are the people that you are trying to or want to reach about your product, your business, your service, because 70% of them will consider what you do or a new product or service based on ads that they hear. And importantly, they agree that podcast ads are the best way to reach them. Now, with other advertising formats, quite often, we're speaking with a very broad brush, they can be seen as quite intrusive. They sort of interrupt your experience, and they can be quite frustrating. A personal example that I always use is the non-skippable YouTube ads, for example. I don't want to watch a 6-second video because I just want to get straight into what I'm consuming. I'll mute myself. Sorry. In some cases, and there's one sports provider in the UK who are super bad at this. They show highlights of football goals as they go in, knowing that there's going to be a big audience for them, me being one of them. But they'll put them on YouTube, and they're only 30 seconds long. But in some cases, they'll put an advert that's 20 to 40 seconds long. And there is absolutely no universe that I will watch a 40-second ad to watch a 30-second video. So they're losing a lot of money pretty much there. And then when it comes to the amount of time spent listening to podcasts, as you can see, quarter on quarter, this is data from Meltwater and We Are Social. The time in terms of hours and minutes that people are spending listening to podcasts is just continuing to grow. So hopefully in this section, I've told you that it's a big space. It's continuing to grow. Now I want to make it happen. You're in this audience and I want to make it happen. How can I do it? I don't know where to begin. I don't know what to do. This section hopefully should give you enough tools to get going and to reach that audience internationally that you're trying to reach. So, like I said earlier on, it's easier than you think. The barrier to entry is super, super low. I will go through with you all of these sections here to show you that whether you've got excuse me, a huge amount of budget, no budget at all, you can compete with some of the big players in your space. Are you going to compete with like the Stephen Bartlett's or Joe Rogan's in the world? Probably not, but you're probably not going to compete against them, or you don't want to compete against them because your podcast might be about something completely different. For example, you might be a therapist and want to offer your services or talk about what you do, completely different. So these are the areas that I'll talk about in any detail. And at the end, I'm happy to take any questions from you. So number one is your topic or your show name. So this is quite big. And I mentioned earlier on, you need to think about a topic that you want to talk about. So the biggest mistake I often find here is that people sort of niche down too quickly. So, for example, somebody might want to start a podcast about a specific type of pasta, for example. There's only so many things that you can talk about that. If you wanted to get about 50 episodes of content out of it, you'd probably find it super, super difficult. Before you start, you need to think of your name and think about your topic, because the topic should be in the name. For example, I'll give you my own. I used to call it Azeem Digital Asks. And then I changed it to Azeem Digital Asks, the all-round digital marketing podcast. Why did I do that? Because of this. Will people who find my show know what it's about? In the past, it was just called Azeem Digital Asks. It didn't mean anything. But the fact that I include the digital marketing podcast in it, there's an SEO benefit to it because I included the words digital marketing podcast. But more importantly, it lets people know what it is my show is about. And that's quite important. So make sure that your name is going to be important and relevant to people looking for it. If you call it something that is completely alien to the topic that you're talking about, you're going to turn people off, because more often than not, you will just be one name in a long list of podcasts that people are searching for. If I move on, you need to think about the type of your show and how often you're going to put it out in terms of your type and frequency. Now, I am a big proponent of, in all areas of marketing that I'm doing, is about forgetting industry averages. You should always test and find out what your audience prefers. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the graph on the graph, if you look at the chart on the right, there's basically three areas: easy, good, and long. And I always say, whenever I'm talking to anybody about this, that you need to pick two out of the three. For example, if you want it to be very easy, but also very long, then it's not going to be good, because you're not going to put the right amount of quality into it. If you want it to be good, and you also want it to be long, then it's not going to be easy. And equally, if you want it to be good and easy, then it's probably not going to be long. You can just hammer out quite a lot of 5-10 minute episodes. So I always say aim for two. Think about what you want. As an aside, what I've done with my podcast is exactly that. If you look at the episodes that I've done some that are an hour long, I've done some that are 40, 30, and then I found for my audience that sort of the 20 to 30 minute mark is the most appropriate for them. In some cases, with specific people, like I've had guests from Google in the past, that's different because I'll talk to them for longer and I can keep the audience for longer because it's a person, it's a topic that they want to talk about. So always pick 2 out of the 3. Next up will be your cover art. So this was an older version of my cover art. As you can see, I didn't mention earlier, but I clearly buy shirts that are like 2 sizes too small for me. So this is important. Now, your cover art is basically, like I said here, it's the first impression that you give to your audience. So if they're searching through a search and results page, or they're on Spotify, for example, and they're looking through a list of squares with images, your podcast needs to try and sell it slightly about what it is that you do. And secondly, I'll put here, if you want to chart, consider imagery. Now, this is something that I've tried in the past with my podcast. So because I do it, I own it. It's all mine, and I've set it all up. This is something that I've done, and for me, that it's worked. So what I've done in the past is I've just included text and the logos for Spotify, Apple, etc. I didn't include any image. That didn't get me into any charts, although I had a high volume of listens. I then included like graphics, so not a person, but just a graphic in the cover art for the show. Nothing heavy, heavy amount of listens, good amount of retention, not in the chart. But every time I included an image of myself or a guest in it, so I included an actual person in there, I found that even with a consistent level of listens and backing, I used to get into the chart. So I can't prove it, but every time I put an image of myself or a guest in there, an image of a person will help you chart. And for me, it's worked. I've tried so many different ways to break my own podcast just to see what works and what doesn't, because like I said, it's mine, I own it. If it breaks, it's all good. This is not super important, but you want something that the audience is going to recognize as your show's music. So again, if you don't have a huge amount of budget, you can literally search for royalty-free music and get what you want. That will help you get off the ground. If you're a singer, for example, just sing, bonus. Royalty-free music is a great way to start and to get you into setting up your podcast and understanding it. As you progress, you can invest in a custom intro. So you can either get a friend who's a musician or whatever, or pay for somebody to create one for you. You can even pay a singer, for example, to even sing it for you. But this is important because you could use that in the background for different sections of your podcast. So if you want to swap sections or talk about different things, if you have 4 or 5 big topics you want to talk about, you can use that as a background. Your custom intro is everything about you that people will recognize to you. There's a big podcasting marketing that's not around anymore, but they got intro music that was already the intro music of another podcast. And so people happened upon them for the wrong reasons, expecting something else. And I know because they told me their attention dropped. So that's pretty important. It's often overlooked. Excuse me. Then it comes to equipment. Now this is super, super important. You can, like I said, get in on board very easily and very, very cheaply. For me, when I started, I spent about, let's say £10 or €10 on a very cheap microphone. And I already had a laptop anyway. I always say it comes to time or money. So if you don't have a lot of money, you'll need to invest a lot of time when it comes to editing. There's a free software that's called Audacity. You can use that to edit your audio. And I mentioned this to somebody recently. When you start doing this, this will take a while because it's very new to you, but it's free, it's super simple to use, and the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. You'll very quickly identify all the times that you say or or just all your filler words. I say a lot, and I can very quickly filter it out and chop it out. The point I'm trying to get across here is if you don't have a lot of money, you just invest more time. As it progresses and you start to get into, sort of sponsorship or whatever, which I'll talk about later on, you can then reinvest that money back into the podcast and get yourself a better microphone, which records audio in better quality and helps you move on. So I talked very briefly there about recording and production and editing. So you got Audition or Audacity. There are two pieces of software that you can use. One of them is paid, one of them is free. There are other tools out there, for example, Riverside. You could probably use this platform that we're on now to record it and take the video, take the audio, strip it. Ultimately, I'll refer back to this image that I showed earlier. Pick 2 out of the 3 when it comes to things like that, because you can take shortcuts with this, but often if you do take shortcuts, you'll find that the quality suffers. And again, an example I can give you is I did an episode, and it's still live now. I'm not going to tell you which one because you'll all go and listen to it, but I did an episode with a guest, and she had long earrings on, and she also had a bracelet, and every time she talked, she was doing this. So the content was great, but it sounded like every time she talked, somebody was waving their house keys. And I must have spent maybe 2 weeks, 4 hours a night for 2 weeks trying to edit every bit out. And it took me a super long amount of time. In the end, I went back to her and I said, look, she was a podcaster as well. I said, look, I love the content. Everything that we did was great, but I'm just not sure I can put this out because of all the background noise. I played it to her. She said, look, it sounds fine to me. Maybe I was overthinking it because I wanted it to be 100% amazing every time. She said, if you're happy with the content, happy with the quality, put it out, see if anybody notices. I bet you they don't. And they haven't. I've now told you about it. So if you find it out and be like, oh, no, it was this episode, and I can tell now. Don't tell me about it because it's too late. Anyway, moving on. Distribution. This is super important. So let's say you've started your podcast, you've got your episodes recorded, you've got your music, you've got your equipment, everything's done, great, edited, you're ready to go. Where do I put it? How do I get it onto Spotify, Apple, etc.? You can use tools like Anchor FM, which has now been rebranded to Spotify for podcasters. That's free, and that is super simple because it's very much a walkthrough process. They will do all the heavy lifting for you. So in that sense, it will just be a case of you set up your podcast, you get your RSS feed, you get everything from them. All you have to do then is literally get your file for your podcast, whether it's video, audio, whatever, drop it into that software. They will distribute it at wherever, Apple, Google, all the other places. I can't think of any of them, the main two. All the other places that podcasts go, they will put it there. What's really good with Anchor or Spotify for podcasters is 2 things. They provide you with a great level of analytics. And also, if there is a platform that your podcast doesn't immediately go to, and I've done this in the past twice, I've had somebody reach out and say, oh, I listened to you on Breaker, for example. I'd never heard of Breaker, but then when I found out people were trying to look for it, Spotify for podcasters had that section there. You just paste in your link and it does it for you. All of the hard work is done for you. You can literally, within 1 hour, record a 10-minute podcast, get it uploaded and publish it, and it'll be out there before the hour is done. That's how super quick it is. The only downside is, this is great for when you're starting out. If you want advanced analytics, so for example, if you are 50 episodes deep, and you want to know exactly what point people drop out of your podcast, you can get some analytics from Spotify for podcasters. But if you want advanced analytics, you then have to move your hosting to a different platform that's likely paid for. And again, I haven't moved because I've got a little hack, which I'll share with you in a second. If you do want to move away from that platform, they will do it for you. They will help you and say, right, are you moving from Spotify for podcasters? Great, we will help you. And it's just a one-click move. Advanced analytics often come with a cost. However, there's a little bit of a hack, which I'm happy to share. I know there are some podcasters in the audience, so you can like literally steal this and take it for free. Any future tips I'll charge for. I often would send people the link to Spotify or to Apple. When I used to share this online and say, hey, I've done a new episode with such and such, person X, check it out. I made the mistake of sharing it on Spotify or Apple, assuming people used to listen to it there. Then I used to share the native link where people could choose where to pick their podcast from. The biggest thing that I changed was I embedded the player on my own website because I found at one point 50% of people, all the listeners, were listening through that native player, but I didn't have any data to back it up. I already had a website, so I thought, right, what I'm going to do is embed the player on my website, send people the link to my website to listen to it, and then if they want to, they can choose Apple, Spotify, blah, blah, whatever they want. But more importantly, I can see where they're going. With that, I can take that information, do stuff with it. So I know now if somebody's on my page for an episode and they've stayed there for like 20 minutes listening to it, I can see how far they've scrolled, how much they've engaged with it, watched it if it's a video. More importantly, I can take that information, I can use it to tailor future episodes. If I talked about digital PR for 10 episodes and I found out after 10 minutes of every episode, people just disappeared, I can take that and tailor the rest of the episodes for it. So as a free tip, send everybody to your website. It's your property, your analytics. You can then use that to take it away. I've waffled on that front. Right, promotion and advertisement. Excuse me. So you've set up your podcast, you've got it live, you've got a solid amount of traffic and listeners and viewers. Now you want to start to make some money out of it. Right, okay. There's two ways to do this. If you're starting out, and I'm not going to put numbers on it, but if you've got a small or a steady amount of listeners, you can consider what's called an affiliate model. So this is often where, and as an example, I've done this in the past, a tool or a company will come to you and say, please talk about our product or service. We will give you a link. If you direct people to that link and they click it and sign up, we will give you a percentage of whatever their subscription fee is. So if it's somebody who signed up for €100, we'll give you like 5 or 6% and then you negotiate that. If you have a solid and consistent audience that's often in the hundreds or the thousands, you can then consider CPMs where you can charge like a flat fee to say, right, I will talk about your product, your service, whatever, but I want you to pay me X, Y, Z amount. So there's two options there for you to do. The worst time to get a dry throat, so sorry. There's two options there for you to do. So you can either consider advertising someone's service or product on an affiliate basis. Once you pick up, you can then start to say, right, I want you to pay me X amount for doing this. Full transparency, when I started out, I used to say to people, I've got 300 or 400 listeners per episode. It's now much bigger. But back then I would say, right, for you to reach my audience, I want you to pay me £500 and this is how it works. And then you can agree on a method from there and then you go and off you go. But now if you want to advertise on my podcast, if anybody's listening, it's a little bit more because I've got a bigger audience. Anyway, let's talk about it separately. Why is podcasting great? Because you can repurpose your content and often people say, oh, you didn't talk about this. This is super, super important. Most platforms now will give you automatic transcripts, right? You can use episode transcripts as well, put them on your website. So you created your podcast, you published it, you put it live. People might not have 20, 30, 40 minutes to listen to the entire podcast, right? Put the transcript on there. One, it has a great SEO benefit because a lot of the time you'll be talking about the keyword or phrase that is the episode or what you're trying to rank for. But more importantly, when it comes to repurposing content, if you've got a 30-minute podcast, that is absolute gold that you can repurpose across multiple channels. What I used to do, and feel free to check back on like my Twitter or my Instagram or whatever, my handles are below. I used to take clips of a hook. I used to get somebody who was talking about something really important to say, oh, my company once made £1 million by doing this one simple trick and this is it. And I used to cut it off before they shared whatever it was, and I used to invite people to listen more by listening to the podcast. Hooks like that are great because they're classed as like teasers or promos. If you have a big guest on, I've done it in the past, you can record separate trailers for them and say, hey, I am on Azeem's podcast, we talk about this, this and this, you don't want to miss it. Basically, there are multiple different ways that you can repurpose your content, reach your audience in multiple formats, wherever they are, and ultimately become podcasting, multi-content, multi-purpose wizard. Right, more importantly, how do you get it going? How do you go internationally? Right, many of you will be looking at something like this. And this is exactly what I did. Okay, I know like here, I've used SEMrush, for example. To rank for the keyword podcast is almost impossible, okay, when it comes to SEO. Look at how hard it is. So that keyword difficulty, for those who don't know, the close to 100%, it's basically near enough impossible. It will take you a long amount of time. High volume, high difficulty, high competition. Using something like SEMrush, you can see here what's searched for, how often people are searching for. More importantly, you can narrow that down. This is exactly what I did. I narrowed it down and I looked at digital marketing podcast. I can see there, look, this how often it's searched for. It's far easier to rank for. If I did want to pay to advertise amongst that, this is what I could do. So I hold down and I found out where it was, where the right countries are for my audience. For example, I didn't know, if I got back, that back when I started, Brazil, huge amount of volume from Brazil. So as a side note, I'll secretly start to learn Brazilian, move out there, live on the beach, and just become podcasting wizard. You'll never see me again. It might help with my fitness, which is horribly lacking at the moment. Anyway, let's move on. How you might be listening now or watching and thinking, right, we've got this guy, he talks really fast, he's got a dry throat at the wrong time, what a pain. How do I know what he's saying works? And here's an example. I've done it literally right there. I said I wanted to go after the phrase digital marketing podcast. Type it in and you'll see it there. The search engine results page, it looks different now because Google changed it like every 5 seconds. But if you go back to my earlier point about including an image of a person, most of the images that you see there have people in, whether it's animated or whatever. So I've done this in the past for multiple sectors. So I've got my own podcast, but I've done it, for example, in quite a few spaces. I've done it in the auto space. I've done audio stuff in the travel, holiday space. I've done it in B2B and B2C, in industrial manufacturing. It is super, super straightforward. I was going to say easy. It's not easy. It's super straightforward. You just have to invest your time and effort, budget if you do have it, but it's not required, into those areas. And then finally, I wanted to share this last bit with you, which is basically something I use, which is called the trust versus performance matrix. So you might be looking at this and you might be thinking, right, he's been talking a lot to us. I really want to get to start podcasting now, but I need to convince somebody in my business that podcasting is the way forward for me. So use this matrix and this will help you get the buy-in that you need, whether it's financially or in terms of time, to get podcasting. It's called the trust versus performance matrix. It literally looks like this, okay? Performance and trust on a relative scale. I have adapted this from something that Simon Sinek's done in the past, where they use this method to recruit people into the US Navy SEALs. But like a true marketer, I always find something to put a marketing spin on it. So it works like this. Talk about podcasting as a channel, okay? So when you're talking about your business about podcasting, it will be like this, right? You would say, hi, CEO or CFO. When it comes to this, people will avoid this channel. So I often use, for example, display advertising. It doesn't perform very well for us. You see the adverts everywhere. We don't trust it because we don't know where our ads are going. So that's going to be a bit of a problem for us. This channel, everybody wants. If you're in marketing or you want this one thing that's going to get everybody to your product or service and you'll literally never have to work a day in your life again, this is the channel that people want. That doesn't exist. It's called the unicorn. If it did exist, none of us would be in jobs. We'd all be millionaires. You can use stuff like this though, which is a very high performance channel, but you trust it a lot. Now I use programmatic display in this example. Why do I use programmatic display? Because it's better than standard display because you see where your ads appear. We trust it still very less or a low scale because brand safety is quite an issue there. You cannot always 100% protect your brand. Where you want to be playing is in this space. So we talk about mid and low performing, but high trust. If you think back to the very start of my presentation, I showed you that graph over 2 years, didn't I? This is where consistency comes in. And this is where you might think, right, the channel is not performing. But if you consider, let's say, mid performing to be all of your content marketing efforts, you trust it a lot because you know over time that will come good. you can say exactly the same for podcasting underneath, and you can swap the two out interchangeably. Treat it as a form of content marketing. It's not going to perform straight away. It will take time, but we trust it because we know that's where our audience are. I know, for example, let's say Brazil, I've got a huge audience there. If I go back and look at Japan, Asia, or United States of America, that's where I know my audience are. For example, my audience at one point, it's not now, but it was 40, excuse me, 40% in the UK, 40% in the US. I used to play on that by swapping British and American guests interchangeably by trying to grow it there. But I was neglecting the other percentage of people, the longer tail, which was places like, I had places like India, Pakistan, God, I can't think of any other country. Thailand, Malaysia. I used to neglect all those countries, thinking, right, I'm only going to focus on the big two. But I started to look at what people from Malaysia, for example, were engaging with when it came to a podcast. You could use that data and say, right, I know this is what people want, and I know people in Germany will only listen to the first 10 minutes of the episode. So I've got to make it really good to make sure that my German audience is happy. Use this graph, use it interchangeably. That will help you get buy-in to your podcasting and content marketing efforts. Right. Talked to you a lot. I'm going to wrap it up and hopefully take some questions from you. So, podcasts are rising in popularity. That is a fact. I've proven that to you at the beginning. If you disagree, when you've left this webinar today, leave your house, go to your neighbour's house and argue with their cat about it, because it's a fact. This will only grow as people are going to start to commute again. I don't have enough time, but as an aside, there's a lot of noise around people having to go back into the office full time and not remote or hybrid or whatever. What are people going to listen to in their cars, trains, or when they're walking or when they're at the gym? I know a guy who exercises at the gym and listens to marketing podcasts. Definitely weird, but people do listen to it. If you're a business and you're trying to generate leads, you could use newsletters. That's what most people do. But if you want a community of people who are going to be around you all the time, start podcasting. Bonus, as you build your podcast, talk about your newsletter, which will generate leads for you. Then share your podcast episode through your newsletter. Giving away gold here. Just like saving for a rainy day, make sure you've got at least 4 episodes in the bank, in your storage, to ensure consistency. The biggest mistake I made was I would record an episode with somebody on a Monday, release it on the Wednesday, next week, same again. But one time my guest pulled out at the last second and I had a gap, and that affects your consistency. As you start to build an audience, the worst thing that you do is break your consistency. So I used to go from once weekly, I did twice weekly, then I went to monthly, and I found a format that fit for me. But just make sure you let your audience know what you're going to be doing and ensure your consistency, and keep those audiences in the bank. And then, as I've just discussed with you, consider how many ways that you can repurpose what you're doing to complement what you're doing with your content strategy, certainly for your marketing efforts. It might be very difficult for you to publish XYZ amount of pieces of content, but I would argue that many people listening to this or watching this will have a website or a business or a client's website, whatever, literally full of content. It might just be hundreds of blog posts that are just very, very text heavy. Those of you who know me and have seen me at conferences before know that I'm a very big component of audio and video, because many people nowadays will sit still and literally read through an entire block of text. And one thing that I will always say is, if you consider our own behavior, many people that I speak to, and I bet you many people watching this now, for example, will be doing something at the same time. So you'll be on your phone, or you might be watching TV tonight with your phone or your tablet or your laptop out. We don't give our full attention to anything. You want to make sure you need to be everywhere where your audience is. Podcasts are a great way to do that. And then, as I mentioned, international audiences can be very, very easily reached with audio and video. One of the things I would say is, don't try and do everything at once for everybody internationally. Start small, maybe start audio only, do a lot of 20-minute episodes. Then as you start to get your data in and understand what people are doing, then you can move into video. You can spend budget on a recording software that will do it all for you and help you out, and then you can grow. But don't try and go too big too soon, and equally don't sort of leash down too tight too soon. Remember what I said about having at least a topic you can discuss for about 50 to 100 episodes. And that, my friends, is pretty much that. If you've enjoyed that, do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I will always call it Twitter, never X. I don't care what anybody says to me. It will be Twitter until I take my last breath. Those are my details there. I will drop the links in the chat. But ultimately, it's been a pleasure. I'm happy to take your questions. And also, so sorry I've got a dry throat at the worst time ever. I will, after this recording, just literally slap myself.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. And so we'll do fast like this. We can go and lie down. So thank you so much. It was really nice. So how that works? Yeah, it is a great presentation. I agree too. So how that works? You can start the question. If you have question, I know that it was really very clear. If not, like I have a question because like I was like during the entire process and also when I was reading your slide. Okay, so everybody loves it. Can I go to my question? Okay. So on a serious note, if you have a question, please write them in the chat, and Azeem will take them. And then I will start. Okay. So I was thinking, okay, there is a sometimes that I'm thinking, okay, I would like to do filmmaking, but I have no clue how to do filmmaking. No clue how to do it, how to start anything. And so I was like, when I was reading about your podcast, I was like, maybe I could start a podcast and like to grab opinion of people. Okay, so how should I do it? Help me in my journey to do filmmaking. And then I'm like,
the video off, right?
And then
yeah.
And so I'm like, this is not something that I'm speaking on as an expert, because like normally in the podcast and I listen, it's for expert to learn something. In this case, it's exactly the opposite. Like bunch of people that know nothing, that give me ideas, and then maybe an expert will come with the time. So what do you think about that? It sucks? No, Sarah, don't do it. Or maybe there is a way of doing that, and maybe it would bring something useful.
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert, but I've done lots and I've broken lots enough to know like what works and what doesn't work. With video, I'm not gonna lie, it's very, very time consuming and it's very hard to get it good, but good is subjective. So I know that there are video podcasts out there that are just literally, they are what they say on the tin. They literally hit record. If you make a mistake or whatever, it's not edited. If you swear by accident, it's still going to go in and they're just going to publish it and go live. That's fine because that raw style seems to work for people. For me, if you look at some of the video podcasts that I've done in the past, and this is an important fact actually, I've got 2 points to make here. Some of them I will edit and chop bits out. That can take quite a long amount of time because you have to pay more often than not for a piece of software that will edit the video and the audio at the same time. If you don't and you're using a free version, you've got to do them separately. Now, if somebody, for example, was to, I'm not going to say swear because that's quite obvious. Let's say they name a company that they worked for and they weren't supposed to. So you then need to edit that out. If you edit just the audio out, you will see that the audio jumps and then the video won't match. So they'll be literally, but not saying anything. To get that to match up is super hard. Equally, if you cut the video out, there's going to be a very obvious like jump, which is quite sudden, and you'll see and notice that when it comes to viewer behavior. Secondly, and most importantly, it is hard, it is time consuming, but it is super, super worth it. I'll challenge anyone now to go on my YouTube, and I'll share a link in a second. You will see that those episodes on YouTube, probably 20, 30 viewers, not a lot. I know that people do not consume my podcast on YouTube, but I can show you that on Spotify video, on average, people will spend anywhere between 1 hour 30 to 2 hour 30 consuming podcasts. I know when people watch my video podcasts on Spotify, I've got them for at least 3 episodes, which is amazing. So at the same time, I'll put it on YouTube as well, because if there are a subset of people who want to watch it on there, they've got it, which is a fantastic thing to do. So in short, it's worth it, but you have to invest, which is why I said start with audio, like take baby steps, start with audio and then move into video. There are tools like Descript, which is really good, because if you use that example of ums and ahs, they will find it for you and then literally delete it. When you take it out, it will edit the video and the audio at the same time, which is great. But in my experience, 9 times out of 10, you probably will have to pay for it.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. Anybody else have a question? It's just we love you, and Azeem, we love you all. Okay, like we love you all. Okay, so yeah, there is a question coming. Okay, have you worked with many well-being-based mental health podcasts, and any specific advice, tips, and tricks to get started and stay consistent?
Yes, that is a great question. So I've not worked with that area specifically, but I have helped people do this in the past. And it's difficult with a topic like that. It's very, very powerful and emotive. So, for example, marketing, you can make it quite light-hearted, and sometimes you can make it quite heavy on technical stuff. With things like this, it's very, what's the word, emotional. It's very emotional driven, but it sounds, I can't think of the right way to say it. It sounds horrible to say, but you can leverage that emotion to drive your audience. So for example, if you're talking to, let me give you a specific example in the past. Somebody who has, for example, tried to get over a suicide attempt. That's quite hard hitting, but you can take that story and you can distill that into so many different sound bites and clips to find what will drive your audience in. Equally, if you're trying to find people who work on the other side, who support people with mental health, and using that example of like a suicide attempt again, you can talk about specific tips and techniques that you've used that has helped someone overcome and recover from that low point in their life. The only thing that I would say is do some research on where you want to fit into in that space, because I imagine, like as you saw at the start, there are lots and lots of podcasts out there that probably talk about this stuff. Before you do anything, find what makes you different, what is going to make you stand out. An example I give, and this is probably not the best one to follow on from such an emotional topic, but true crime, there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of true crime podcasts. Look at there and think, right, what are they doing to stand out? And you can do the same with like well-being based and mental health podcasts. Think about what makes you stand out. If you don't know what makes you stand out, don't even hit record until you find that out first, and do some research into your audience. In terms of getting started, the best thing you can do is hit record. That's it. My very first episode, go back and listen to it. Great guest, Luke Carthy, brilliant guy, good friend of mine. I listened back to that and I hate it. So many times I've thought about unpublishing it. It was very dry, raw. I didn't like it, but I just bit the bullet, pressed record, and I went. And if you listen to one of our more recent episodes, I've got video in there. We have laughs and jokes. I cut bits out. You can see that the progression is there. So your first is not going to be your best, but just make sure it's definitely not your last. And also, like I said, consistency. Make sure you've got a few episodes in the bank, because there will be a week or 2 weeks or months where you just think, oh God, I'm so tired today. If you've already got the content there, the most you have to do is just hit publish, and then you can go to bed and relax. You've got that in the locker. Consistency is the big one. Stay consistent. You're laughing.
Thank you so much for your answer. Monte, I saw then you say you share a link. Not very clear to me what that link is, so maybe you can write something more about that. Yeah. And if anybody has any question, this is your last chance because we have like 4 minutes to have Azeem is up, and then we let him go. So if you have a question, it's now. Okay, so we do it like this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You need to type really faster there. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for joining for the episode. It will be recorded. So it will be on the YouTube channel. We will share it inside the community where many more people can have the opportunity to see what you are saying. And I didn't say that at the beginning, but I really feel that podcast, if you work in SEO, it's really important because now by checking people, often you have their podcast that are related to the people or to the company. So keep an eye on that also. Okay. Thank you so much, Azeem. I don't know what to say more than that. And thank you for joining us.
Please like, rate, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, leave your house, knock on your next door neighbour's house and say, look at this is great. But thank you very much for having me. And we discovered before the call that if you do this, you get a weird effect which doesn't work now. Look, there you go. But yeah, thanks a lot for having me, and look, connect with me on socials. I'm more than happy to help you out. But most importantly, when you start your podcast, share with me the links. I'm more than happy to check it out for you.
Thank you so much. That's very kind. Bye. Have a nice evening. Ciao, ciao. Opa. Wait.